I think we're beginning to have our participants joining us today. And so let this event here, organized by the Global Policy Institute and Bay Atlantic University, get going. My name is Paolo von Schirach. I serve as president of the Global Policy Institute and as a faculty, as a professor of political science and international relations at Bay Atlantic University. The two institutions, Bay Atlantic and GPI, are affiliated. It is a great pleasure for me today to kick off this series on sustainability. And we're very fortunate to have two great experts who are going to guide us to understand what's going on. Of course, as you may have seen, obviously, from the headline, the title of this webinar, it's about the road to the new COP event. And it's not a totally accidental that it's being held in the Gulf. And of course, the Gulf countries, as everybody knows, are best known for the production and selling all over the world of hydrocarbons. So how does that work? You know, how does clean tech, renewable energy, and the new agenda that is about mitigating, if possible, adapting when necessary to global warming, you know, it seems like contradictory, right? That those who produce and sell hydrocarbons should really, you know, maybe not be even at the table. Well, they are very much so, because they will convene and host this event, because everybody realizes that we have to do something down the line, maybe not today, not immediately, in order to deal with this issue of global warming. But there's a lot more to that, and I don't want to preempt the discussion here. I would like to introduce my old friend and colleague, Andrea Zanon, who's been very kind to organize, actually, who's been really with us to organize this event. He informed us right before the beginning that one of the speakers...
I do the paper.
Somebody should...
I regret.
Please, all of you participants, mute your microphones, because otherwise we hear what's going on in where you are. Please mute your microphones. Thank you. So as I was saying, one of our panelists, unfortunately, was in some kind of a car accident. Hopefully nothing really serious, but that makes it difficult for him or probably impossible to join us. So that's unfortunate, but these things happen, and we wish him and whoever was in the car with him, you know, that everything is fine and there was nothing really serious. With that said, I would like, as I said, to turn it over to my good friend Andrea Zanon, who we go back a long way, and he has worked on these issues for many years now, both when he worked at the World Bank here in Washington, and after that as a consultant, as a practitioner, working with all kinds of private sector and government entities and international organizations. So Andrea, why don't I leave it to you to introduce yourself and also our other distinguished panelists, and then you can kick off by explaining better what this is all about. Andrea, over to you.
Thank you, Paolo. It's a pleasure to be back at GPI. We met in 2005 with Paolo when I was at Georgetown, and since then we've collaborated in many areas. Over the last 25 years, I've been working advising financial institutions and sovereign wealth fund, as well as ministers and the private sector on green growth, resiliency, so working a fair amount on disaster risk management, as well as the clean tech transition. In this context, I think we're just a few weeks away to COP, and it's important to try to bring some clarity what COP is, since COP is the annual summit around climate change that has been going on for a very long time, since the Rio summit. I was fortunate enough to participate to 5 over the last 15 years. So I tried to bring some insights while staying away from other less important matters, as these summits are massive efforts. They're very bureaucratic, they're politically charged, but they happen at a crisis time, which is both geopolitical, environmental, as well as economics. So the summit is really, if we look back over the last 2 years, we had a COP26 was in Glasgow in the UK, and last year was in Egypt. Both of these events were, so to speak, procedural. They were very unambitious, to say the least, and so I'm one here that welcomes the energy sector taking a leading role. Dubai, Abu Dhabi, actually the UAE as a whole is the 7th largest oil producer in the world, and I'm not surprised they are taking the difficult role of hosting this year event. Now, just to shed a little bit of clarity, the top priority for this year's event is really to take stock of where we are in the decarbonization commitments that were made since Paris. Paris 2015 was where the climate accords were signed, and where a lot of the country committed to the what is called net zero, or basically reaching neutrality by 2050. Now, these commitments are good promises. There's no such a strong binding agreement that that forces any of these countries to to deliver on these harsh commitments. So that is going to be really trying to figure out, where are we with our commitments? Where is China? Where is the US? Where is India? Where is Brazil? Where's Russia? Some of these leaders are not even going to show up at a Dubai event that starts at the end of November. So what is this going to deliver in the middle of a global crisis, where there is a conflict in the Levant between Israel and Palestine? There is Russia getting close to 2-year anniversary of the conflict, huge tension between China and the West. So I think it's important to try to understand what can we accomplish, and I'll try to rapidly summarize.
Andrea, since you know the region very well, and obviously we are aware of what's going on right now, the ongoing conflict, Israel, Gaza, Palestine, and obviously positions that have been taken by various countries regarding this. Do you think that this is going to be a real problem? In other words, when you convene all these countries in the Gulf, that this ongoing conflict, which probably will still sadly continue by that time, is that going to derail this, or is that going to affect it in any way? What's your view?
Naturally, it is affecting from the ambition of making splashy announcements. So if I'm the organizer of this event, I'll try to tone down my even communications, because there will be, this is a tragic moment with risk of escalations. Obviously, there's going to be, and this is very typical, increased protest at COP, where the civil society groups normally take a very militant role, and the vulnerability of the Palestinian people in Gaza, where I've worked extensively, is going to be only enhanced. This is one of the most water poor part of the world. So I think there's going to be maybe a very active protest. I also do think that major participants might not show up, just to be very precise on what are the things that we might not see. There are security concerns from US CEOs, bankers, that might treat the localized crisis in the Levant as a regional crisis, which is not the case yet. So I think we're going to see that facade of tone down, less participants, potentially more protest. But on the other hand, as Machiavelli sort of used to say, never waste a good crisis, right? We've seen what Europe transition to cleaner energy or rather what the crisis in Ukraine and the blockage of 30% of natural gas supply to Europe made to the green growth transformation of Europe. So I do think that this crisis provides a tremendous insecurity from the energy standpoint. Countries want to become more energy independent, more energy secure. And so I think the global energy transition in the long term will take a boost, even though in the short term we'll see more volatility, more energy prices, higher energy prices, more drilling, so to speak, and so potentially also some ambitious project being shelved. But I remain very bullish, particularly because the energy leadership, as quoting CEO Sultan Jaber, says we need maximum energy. This is what he's saying. We need maximum energy in this transition, but we also need focus on maximum carbon reduction. So I think it's a difficult role that the UAE is taking up, but I think it's absolutely welcoming the leading 10 global energy provider to become part of the solution and becoming important players in the renewable energy transformation.
Before we turn to the other distinguished panelists, Andrea, maybe you want to, since you said this opportunity of this COP28 is to take stock, in a sense, of what was pledged, keeping in mind those pledges were just not necessarily enforceable, because a country said, I'm pledged to do this, I pledged to do that. Well, if they do, it's great. If they don't, nothing really happens to them. But how does it look? In other words, the net zero objective, is this some kind of a mirage, or is it something that looks maybe not achievable within the time frame envisaged, but that is not a dream? That is something that, because of new technologies, because of new investments, including by the Gulf states, is actually doable. Maybe not precisely as envisaged in Paris, but something like it. What's your take on that? I know I'm not asking you to preempt the summit.
No. I think that's a great question. Let me start with a couple of bad news. The transition to zero carbon, it's progressing very slow. And so we have about 8 years of what we call carbon budget. So we have 8 to 9 years to be able to bring down the emission to the level where we don't, so to speak, pass those tipping points that will accelerate and intensify natural hazards that are climate induced. So the progress is very slow, and that's not good news. And in fact, I think at COP we will all get a better sense of where are we, where are these commitments, and where are we in terms of delivering on this commitment. On the more positive, which we're not talking enough about. If we look at 2022, investment in oil and gas was roughly 1.1 trillion. In the clean tech, we're talking about 2.2 trillion. So that is double. That is doubled. And even if we jump to the US, since we are all, or a lot of us are in the US, the United States Inflation Reduction Act, $360 billion of climate-friendly investment. This is a year old, roughly. It's really leveraged $1 trillion investment in clean tech. So the revolution is happening. There's plenty to be critical about. There's plenty to be negative about. For example, if I'm a developing country, and I actually worked very closely with the Minister of Finance of Djibouti, his position at COP is going to say, we have not seen the results of this $100 billion low-income countries climate fund. The West is failing to deliver. Only 20% is being allocated. Last year in Egypt, we talked about the climate damage, it's called damage and loss fund, basically to compensate these countries where the GDP loss due to natural hazards, disaster event that are climate induced should be funded by the West. That's not happening at the speed that that should have happened. But in spite of that, the market has signaled that we are over the bump we are transitioning to our green tech. So we should expect this $2.2 billion, $2.2 trillion to become 4 to 5 by 2025. And that's the greatest news that we should all celebrate today.
Thank you. Well, I guess we can come back in the course of our discussion about the level of technological, how can I say, effectiveness, the new how these new green tech, solutions help us really address forcefully the problem. But why don't you, Andrea? He's frozen. I don't know why. Are you still there? Okay.
Yeah, I'm here. I heard you everything.
Frozen. Can you kindly introduce your colleague, and so
Sure.
he can give us his own aspect, his own perspective based on his expertise. And so again, he's joining us from Amman, I believe, in Jordan. I hope it's Amman.
Yes,
anyway,
yeah.
Thank you. Please, Andrea, just a couple of words.
Thank you, Paolo. Pleasure to introduce Zuhair Shammout. He's not only a dear colleague and friend, but somebody that is sitting in the region, in the middle also of this geopolitical tension. He's a capital market senior specialist, and I think he'll be able to give us a little bit of the his perception on this transition in the middle of tight economics, geopolitical tensions, and with us trying to play a role at this COP28 that is happening, that is only 3 weeks away. So over to you, Zuhair. Thanks again for participating with us today.
Well, thank you, Paolo, so much, and thank you, Andrea. There's not much what could say after a practitioner in the field like Andrea, but we'll keep it precise and short. And thank you for this opportunity. Look, I mean, one of the things we need to look at first is that our societies are facing many challenges right now: climate change, energy transition, decarbonization, and the global consensus of all is it's becoming more tangible. We see more crises, environmental crises, floods, happening, and if I am today going to speak specifically about decarbonization and climate change, but also and specifically energy transition, how do one achieve the goals of COP28 and those that were set in Cairo in 2027 and also in Glasgow? You said something that is golden. It might seem quite ironic for a energy producing country and region to be hosting COP28. However, I would argue that in the reason that mastering the challenges which I just mentioned requires vast amount of capital, and this transition needs equity, finance, capital, and therefore countries with strong capital markets would be the best countries to create that transformation. Now, whilst economists might say figures don't lie, I would say also to that it's true. However, it's true that figures don't lie. However, liars figure, and with that we learned that sometimes destruction could be good for a GDP, because you create destruction and you build more opportunities in other sectors, and therefore prosperity and growth. There are multiple ways in which one could measure a GDP. In this case, it could be, wages, the sum of wages, taxes, higher income, higher rental, better lifestyle. And with that comes growth and prosperity. We are looking at the population in the region, specifically in the Gulf countries, where the majority of the population is under the age of 30. In the case of Saudi Arabia, for instance, 70% of the population is under the age of 30. There is transitional growth. And again, as economists would argue and say that transition and transformation happens when there's a younger generation, it's easier and adaptable for transformation and change. And that is another reason to why green growth and green growth investments are going to yield greater results in these regions versus others. And we're already seeing a result of that. I mean, if we are looking at the UAE vision, right? So the UAE and Saudi Arabia, in this case, I would start with UAE because it's hosting COP. The UAE has the green agenda for 2023, and it aims to, again, as we say, increase the GDP from 4 to 5%, increase the exports from 24 to 25 billion AED for this year, and reduce the country's emission to less than 100 kilowatts. In the case of Saudi Arabia created something called the SGI, which is the Saudi Arabia Green Initiative. And it aims to reach net zero, as Andrea earlier mentioned, by 2060, transitioning the country to a green economy. Now, you have exceptions here. The Glasgow, it was announced that it should be 2050, but those countries received exemptions because they are high countries with high production of fossil fuels, like China, and in the case of Saudi Arabia. There is one important point here, which is green tech. One of the things that could expedite the process of net zero by, instead of 2060, 2050 in the case of Saudi, or 2040 in this case, could be the more investments and more developments of green tech, semiconductors and the likes. And that's why I believe it is ideal that current COP is going to be in an oil generating, oil producing country, specifically like the UAE, a region that has predominantly a younger generation ready for prosperity growth, with an incredible market capital allocated specifically for that.
Regarding the overall, thank you first of all for this overview, but regarding the general, how can I say, environment, we know, because it's been talked about so many times, that the two big elephants in the room, of course, we know who they are, China and India. That yes, this country can do this and this country can do that, and countries there in the region, because they have got money, they can afford to be, how can I say, visionaries and look below the horizon and see new possibilities and opportunities. But in order for COP28, to see where are we going globally as a world society, clearly what China and India do or don't do clearly is extremely important. And of course, we also know that the poorer countries have a hard time making the kinds of green investments that would be necessary. I was reading, and again, this is not news, I mean, that Africa has 60% of the potential for solar energy globally, right? Which is great. Say, my God, I mean, solar, 60% of the world's solar energy to be installed in Africa. The problem is who pays, who's got the money to do it. And that really is the huge challenge. I am aware here and there of projects, whether it's Namibia or Morocco or some places in South Africa. All this is great, but since you deal with the capital markets, the challenge is to fund these ideas, which may be actually doable and bring about real value. But again, that combined with the uncertainties related to China and India, well, one country has 1.4 billion, whatever. Now India has more people than China, and we know that the cheapest way to deliver energy to low-income people is coal, right? Which is the worst of the worst in terms of the climate change challenge. So how do you view all this? In terms of, and I know it's work in progress, and maybe some technological breakthroughs will allow us to reduce costs and make it easier and cheaper to proceed with this investment. But from your own perspective, both regional and global, how do you view these challenges?
So this is a very good point, Paolo, that you brought, and I always try to prevent discussing China and India because it's in its own discussion of that. However, if we are going to look at the initiatives that Glasgow basically initiated, and these countries with higher capital growth are pursuing, is again more investments in not only in their countries or their said regions, but globally. Africa is one of them. However, there's definitely great politics and bureaucracy behind that transformation. Part of that is basically increasing more tariffs on on fossil fuels whilst encouraging and doing tax exemptions on green carbon and green energy. These matters will not be easily implemented in these regions, in these countries. It is definitely a challenge. However, we need to start somewhere. I mean, Andrea earlier was mentioning, and I'm sure he has better 2 cents to add to that than myself. However, he was mentioning that we are looking at 2 trillion that in reality could be pushed up to 5 trillion. You know, just a good portion of that is a good start. And I think the region in the Middle East is taking a lead in this. And so long Saudi Arabia is taking a lead, and it's giving an example, a very solid example that other countries are going to follow. I mean, allow me to add a good point here about what Saudi has created to be, and in Glasgow, they were basically pointed at and shamed, just like China in this case, that you will not be able to achieve anything. Today, we're looking at Saudi, and they announced the 5 mega projects, which have their own green, eco-friendly developments in the trillions, each one of them. NEOM, as an example, part of the 2030 vision, currently produces 600 tons of clean hydrogen. And I didn't say it is green hydrogen, it's clean hydrogen. And the word clean hydrogen it's a Saudi slogan, it's a Saudi branded name. And why did they use clean hydrogen? Because now they are taking the lead in becoming the stabilizer of green hydrogen. You've got green hydrogen, you've got ammonia, you've got blue, etc. Saudi Arabia, they're now stabilizing the clean hydrogen. And not only this, they're becoming a leader in enabling regulators to regulate and support developers, investors, operators, to incentivize them to develop green energy and green tech and so forth and so on, to set that example for the global market to follow. NEOM is one example, Red Sea, Amala, and all these
not everybody
bigger projects.
You can kindly explain a little bit about NEOM, because I know a little bit about it. I have friends of mine who work there, by the way, so I'm aware. But maybe all our participants are not aware of this mega project of this new futuristic city that the Crown Prince has envisioned, of Saudi Arabia envisioned to be like a laboratory test for all kinds of things. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit.
Well, there's definitely not much I could say that would be enough about this futuristic project. But in 2015, the Vision 2030 of Saudi was announced. And again, at that point, His Highness Prince Mohammed bin Salman announced the Vision 2030, where he showed the NEOM project, the line, which is a futuristic development of a complete self-sustainable city generated by green hydrogen, net zero and carbon efficient. That will be, I think it's a 1.5 trillion development, and it will be attracting not only local, but international investments, and more so a spin out of that is the Red Sea project. You know, geographically, that area was desert and the Red Sea. And Red Sea happens to be one of the best coral reefs in the world. And it's a beautiful piece of land that has not been utilized before. And it's basically desert and seawater. And that desert and seawater today is going to be transformed to be the best financial development cities in the world. It's going to be, the financial district. It's going to have the Wall Streets. It's going to have the industrialized manufacturing developments, and all are going to be net zero and green efficient. Of which the green hydrogen development, which is already up and running, and it should be in commencement in 2026, will be producing 600 tons per day of clean energy, specifically for the line, which is NEOM project. I'll leave it to Andrea to elaborate a little bit as well on that.
If I can kind of make sure that I got, and we all got the gist of what you're saying. I mean, the significant contribution of the Gulf states, particularly the Emirates and Saudi Arabia, as you indicated, is to be sort of trailblazers and indicate potential solutions that could be scaled up globally, right? That they can experiment and make huge investments because they've got the cash, to be honest, with everybody. And so they can afford to kind of some kind of risk taking to say, hey, let's see how this works. Let's scale it up to the point that everybody can see, provide proof of concept to see how this works, and everybody can follow our lead in a sense, because we can be trailblazers. Is that a way to characterize this?
Absolutely, Paul. I think the UAE and Saudi Arabia in this case are being the leaders in that development, and the examples I gave earlier of it being a younger generation, a younger populace, eager for transformation, a high capital, financially capable, and also willing to become more more sustainable in green energy and less focused on fossil fuel. So definitely they want to set the example, and they are actually setting an example currently. I mean, in my field, a lot of people want to be in Saudi, want to be in the UAE, want to take part. And if you're not there, they feel that they're missing out. And that, as a sign, is an enough indication that that's where the start is, and the global market will follow.
Thank you. Of course, to the layperson, this looks somewhat bizarre and contradictory. You got in Saudi Arabia Aramco, which is the largest oil company in the world, right? By many measures. And then at the same time, a focus on green tech and green investments is like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde here. But that said, it's not contradictory. I think we can understand.
Paulo, just to add to this important point, Aramco actually has the lowest methane emissions by any measure this year. And Saudi in Glasgow was the first to commit to the global methane pledge. And it's ironic, but that's again another way that Saudi and the region are setting examples and allowing others to follow. And again, it's an example. If Aramco was able to do it, everybody else will have to be able to.
Absolutely. It's Paulo, again, I'm going to turn it to Andrea.
The money is going to determine the speed of this transition. The Gulf country have this massive liquidity. Look at Saudi. Saudi was the fastest growing G20 economy in 2022. We're not surprised to see $1.5 trillion allocated to zero net city. Let's remember, 40% of trade goes through that area in the world, the canal. So the industrial city built as part of NEOM is just part of the future of business. I think Zuhair touched on an important point. The fear of missing out is also what's driving the market. And we should all be comfortable seeing energy producers which have the infrastructure to produce blue hydrogen as a start, and therefore to move quicker to green hydrogen. So with all this, and with all the understanding that the risk of climate disrupting the market, this is an important data point that we don't talk enough about. 30 to 35% oil and gas production across the world is highly vulnerable to climate disruption. Let me just give you one example. The cold freeze in Texas, this is of 2021. So this was like a cold winter that basically shut down 40% of North America oil and gas production. One event, a cold freeze, that was $100 billion losses. A geopolitical event, it could be an attack like the Houthis 4 years ago. They shut down the same amount of the Saudi oil and gas oil capability. So I think there's so much momentum, and the fear of missing out is definitely driving the market momentum. I finish with this point. Over the last couple of days, there were announcements in the European Union there where ESG, environmental, social, and governance requirements are going to become compulsory in January 2024, which means 200,000 companies in the European Union will have to report on their climate impacts, on their social impact, their governance. So the market is catching up with regulations, and the regulation is adjusting to the market. So let's expect big results in COP this year.
I want to ask you, Andrea, in a moment, but I want to make a quick point for everybody to understand, because I want to ask you about green hydrogen in a second, Andrea. but I just wanted to point out for people who may not be aware of, when we say methane and the fact that the Aramco, first of all, oil giant, okay? It's not Exxon, the oil giant, it's Aramco. People think Exxon is the biggest oil company in the world, but it's not. That's very, very, very small compared to. So anyway, when our colleague here just said they've reduced dramatically methane emission, and methane is a kind of a odorless, colorless gas that is the result of drilling operations in oil and gas. And guess what? What is it? 200 times worse than CO2? Am I correct? Did I get that right?
It's between 80 and plus. I mean, it's at least 80 times more powerful than CO2.
Greenhouse gas is a lot worse than CO2, which everybody's heard about. And so, but it's the byproduct of all kinds of different things, including a production of hydrocarbons. And so the ability to contain it, to capture it before it's released in the atmosphere is a huge help in the reduction of greenhouse gases. Of course, there are other sources of methane. Everybody has heard about the cows and all that, but we won't get into all those details. I want to ask you, Andrea, now about green hydrogen, because again, this is something that you and I have talked about. I am a complete neophyte here. I know very little about it. I just, as I mentioned, I saw an enormous new project going on, being developed as we speak in southern Morocco, but there's more going on. You mentioned blue hydrogen, green hydrogen. Can you explain to the non-professional what that means and why is that important and why is it becoming more and more, a high-profile issue that has been talked about all over?
Sure. And I'll try to keep it simple. Unfortunately, the green hydrogen CEO is not here today, but number one, I think it's important to understand that green hydrogen it's accepted and liked by all. Even in the United States, you see that both Republicans and Democrats support it because it's a natural evolution from the way hydrocarbons, the hydrocarbon industry is today. So when you think of the natural next steps for Saudi and the UAE is leveraging their existing infrastructure, meaning they use the similar infrastructure to produce blue hydrogen. Now, blue hydrogen is still cheaper than the green hydrogen being completely neutral, completely clean, and it's produced via electrolysis, and it's based on renewable energy. So that is where the massive money right now is going. We'll talk a little bit about clean tech as well in a second, but that's where the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Canada, they're all convinced the United States, because it makes good business sense and it keeps the energy leadership in the same leadership position while doing good. Now, it's important to understand also the role of international financial institutions, big players like Davos. Why is Davos important? 3 years ago, Davos launched what is called the Davos First Mover Coalition. It basically convinced the top 50 companies in the world to invest in pricey green products. Let me give you an example. Green hydrogen is one, green cement, green steel, green aluminum, green coal. These today, actually 2 years ago, these products were all very expensive. What Davos, the economic forum is one of the most important hub for decision-making, for gathering, for global leadership. Davos convinced these global players, global corporations, to buy and invest in green coal, green hydrogen, even if it was pricey, to send a market signal that these companies are committed to this transition. So while sometimes we get stuck in the news, the truth is these massive players have already committed and are betting on the future of green coal, green hydrogen, and it's happening at a much faster pace than we think. Since I'm Italian, I also want to celebrate what my country is doing in this. At the beginning of September, Italy hosted the Saudi-Italian summit. 21 MOU were signed in Milan. Guess what? the most important of it was signed with ENI, which is the national oil and gas company. And the MOU was signed to partner in Saudi Arabia for the development of the largest green hydrogen project as part of NEOM. So NEOM, again, this is the visionary city of the future, which is based on partnership with the Italians, the Spanish, the American, the Canadian. And even to piggyback, Paolo, in one of the questions before, what is China, India, Japan, all these countries, what are they doing? The Biden climate agenda, in this case, the Inflation Reduction Act, worked as a domino that is basically catalyzing a rush to be at the table, to invest in green hydrogen, to invest in clean tech. China is following the lead, South Korea, Japan, India, Canada, everybody is following because there is massive amount of money to be made. I want to finish with these thoughts. Since we have young students participating, we want to think of early stage company, startup, innovation, women entrepreneurs. What's happening in that market? Well, the good news is that we start seeing a lot of what I call green unicorns, meaning clean tech or green growth focused early stage company that reaches the unicorn level. The unicorn means you have a valuation of $1 billion or more. So what I like about what's happening in the green unicorn space is the early stage company reaches the $1 billion valuations a lot quicker than a conventional company. Let's say a typical technology company, which takes 6 to 7 years to get to the unicorn club. Green tech takes 4 in average. Right now we have about 5% of the global unicorns are clean tech focused. We're going to see the number accelerate dramatically. And final point, if we look at this deceleration or divestment over the last 2-3 years due to geopolitical, economics, high cost of money, inflation, supply chain, we see that venture capitalists are slowing down their investment in startup, but their investment in clean tech, it's actually slowing down a much less than in the traditional market. So I think there is great market momentum. The policy is catching up. The capital market is convinced that green tech and climate-friendly investment is going to be part of the way we do business going forward.
Thank you. Can I ask both of you, I guess, if you have any thoughts? Obviously, one topic that is definitely on the table, but that because of a lot of anxieties that it provokes is very controversial. That is nuclear power, right? Because we had nuclear power now for half a century or more. There's nothing new. Of 20% of U.S. electricity, maybe now it's a little less, generated by nuclear power. But there is enormous concerns about accidents. Everybody knows Chernobyl, Fukushima Daiichi, and all those things. Now there is a new flavor, if you wish, in nuclear power, which is small nuclear reactors, which seem to be easier, scalable. Have you any thoughts? I mean, from what I hear, but you gentlemen are the experts, it's hard to think about a non-carbon future without nuclear power. Do you see a growing role of a redesigned, reconfigured nuclear power, if it is about small nuclear reactors or any other variation thereof? We know that nuclear reactors have become extraordinarily expensive because of this, that, and safeties and redundancies and insurance costs, all kinds of things. But is this solution of the small nuclear reactors feasible, viable, or is this just one of the things that are on the table, but with not much momentum behind them? Compare, say, to green hydrogen or the rest. Andrea, or whoever.
I can go quickly. I think nuclear is part of the mix. We have to have it as part of a solution. France has done extraordinarily well in its maintaining its nuclear facility. I think the 2 examples you mentioned of accidents that has basically caused a deceleration of nuclear investment, they were, I'm tackling just an element here. they were designed and implemented with very low resiliency in place. I actually went to Fukushima. I was part of the resiliency team looking at how natural hazards or natural disasters, so to speak, interact with energy infrastructure. With the understanding of risk and vulnerability and exposure, I think we are able to develop much smaller nuclear facility that can protect countries, that can ensure stronger energy security, and potentially also isolating the countries from regional shocks, as we are experiencing both in Central Asia and in the Middle East. So I'm a big fan of thinking of a mixed solutions. You cannot achieve zero net overnight. Hydrocarbons are going to stay here for a long time. Renewable is catching up quickly. Hydrogen is going to be the quickest growing, but we also need to be open and to work together toward this energy mix that is indispensable for energy security.
Let's go back.
Paulo, if you may. Definitely, I agree. I agree with what Andrea said. Also, just to add that we're looking at green growth, and with growth comes growth of population, growth of demand, and therefore one energy solution wouldn't be enough. A small nuclear energy conductors is ideal. Again, it goes around regulating it, but just like anything else, time and more R&D will have to be done. And I'm quite positive that regulations are going to enable the nuclear generating, specifically the small scale. I mean, you could look at something as big as a truck could generate electricity for 25 years. So definitely it is needed. There's going to be huge demand for it. And just like there's growth in green energy, in green hydrogen, there will also be demand in nuclear, certainly.
I was going to ask you, Zuhair, about all this, since your focus is on capital markets, etc. From your perspective, do you see, of course, in the region there, you explained it very well. Obviously, there is a vision. There is, how can I say, the cushion of an enormous amount of wealth that can be invested discretionally by the sovereign funds or by whoever is in charge there. And that's extremely important, and how that can lead to others. But if you look globally in terms of capital resources that are being allocated to this new energy sector, are you encouraged by the trends? Do you see that, all this costs money? We all agree, and that the money is going to be there, and that particularly the return on investment is going to be there. In other words, that there is the ability, quite frankly, to make money. In other words, companies need to make money in order to justify huge investments. This is not just for the fun of it. So from your perspective, and I know this is a very, very broad question, and each country is different and each region is different, but do you see an encouraging trend in fresh capital being allocated to all these various ventures in the various sectors, whether it's green hydrogen or small nuclear or the usual solar and wind that we are more used to hear about? Are you encouraged by the trends, or there is still cold feet by many who say, well, this stuff, is it going to work? We're going to lose money. How do you view it from your perspective? You're muted.
You're muted.
Yeah.
Sorry. I'll ask an important question here. If you were walking around Oklahoma or Macedonia or Djibouti 150 years ago, how many gas stations would you be seeing around you? Fast forward, every single city you'd be walking by, you'll have a gas station. The same money and the same development that went into developing all these gas stations and growing the fossil generating and the car and the automotive industry will be able to transform and make this in every single country, in every single nation. How many Teslas do you see now in the United States? You would probably see as many Teslas everywhere around the world. How many, and how many solar panels are you seeing? How many wind farms are you seeing flying from across the Pacific from the US overseas? that same transformation will grow, and it will grow more, and there's going to be more demand, and then there will be more supply. Just like I gave the example before. One of the fun ways to calculate the GDP is the sum of consumption plus investment plus the government expenditure. So it needs some regulations, some government preferences to spend on this versus that. And with that, we will be able to achieve this globally, not only in, I mean, similar to how Exxon developed globally and OPEC grew, and you have a company like Aramco, you'll be able to create similar structure with private-public partnerships, with international capital, the likes of Goldman Sachs investing now in green hydrogen and so forth, just like they did in fossil fuels 100+ years ago.
If I may jump in, Paolo.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm going to pick up on the Tesla comment. 5 years ago, I had dinner with the number 2 of one of the largest car manufacturing in the country. And I was humbly asked what's happening to Tesla. And, you know, he says, well, look, it's a good idea. It's a great, but it will never happen. It will never make it. Sometimes we have the same mind frame when thinking of climate tech, green investment. Now, there are 2 data points that I wanted to stress. In 2022, $1 out of $3 invested or asset under management was sustainability. 1 out of 3 of the $50 trillion. Number 2, if you look at Wall Street, they've already decided that investment risk and climate risk go hand in hand. That's why they control and they've acquired quietly all the risk assessment firms, all the climate data management firms, because they understand that climate risk is going to make them competitive. And so I don't think we're arguing is money flowing in. Money is flowing in a massive ways. And I believe the green growth is going to be as big as the internet of the 90s. And we are starting to accept that the energy super players are at the table because obviously they're making huge profit with it.
Just one quick thing, and I see we're getting close to the end of our time, and I know you gentlemen have other things to move on to, but just very quickly, there have been some, unfortunately, negative news in the US business press pointing out at some, let's call it glitches, to be polite, on the road to green. Governors of many states in the United States that have gone pleading to Washington to say, hey, the money for the offshore wind farms we were planning to do is not enough. We need more money because this is not, we have huge cost overruns and we cannot face it, and we need more money from Washington. Also, we hear stories about the big car manufacturers, of course, Tesla is in a different category, who say, oh boy, yes, we're doing the electric cars, but we're losing money on them. It's still not working. The business model is not there. I mean, I know we're not going to resolve this issue in 2 seconds, but are these just, understandable glitches of bad planning or bad, how can I say, not carefully allocated resources, or are there structural problems that may become impediments down the line? I'm asking the question to both of you, and I know we're almost out of time. Zuhair, maybe
untested territory. It's untested territory, so there's always going to be shortcomings. This should not be an obstacle. It's just like a feedback. As you know, when you launch a business, you focus on the wrong segment of users, and you change, you pivot. I think glitches are going to be there for a while. That's why we want the energy leadership to play the important role that they're trying to play.
Thank you. I see. Do we have Jamie, do we have a question here? I see somebody who is can we see that?
No, that was me sending a message to a former colleague from the Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery, which, again, a great leader of leadership and understanding how resiliency is critical in building sustainable energy system.
Zuhair, the last word is for you. We're almost out of time. Your closing comments.
Yeah, well, I just think that it's important that regulators and governments now are up with the developments that are happening. It's a challenge, and I think we need more practitioners like Andrea and his good colleague as well, to take part in giving back their experience to governments and to regulators and government bodies around the globe to be able to support the green growth initiatives.
Well, gentlemen, I thank you both, and I'm sorry that our other colleague could not join us on account of his car accident. I'm sure we'll have another time. And Andrea, many thanks to you for suggesting this great idea. And as I said at the beginning, this is just the beginning of our series. We will have you, gentlemen, and others to enrich this conversation. This is we're exciting times, and certainly the combination of new policy approaches, regulation, innovation, and investments will do things which perhaps we cannot even dream now because we don't quite see them happening. So on this note, Andrea and Zuhair, we thank you very, very much for making the time to join us. To be continued, as I said, you have a standing invitation to join us again and enrich our knowledge about this. And of course, we'll see what happens, with COP28. We'll be watching, but that's not the end of the story, right? That's just one step on a very long road. And we're talking about the transformation of the world economy. Really, that's not a small task, and hopefully better climate and better living conditions for all of us, particularly those who live in poor countries. So with that, I thank you, Andrea and Zuhair. I thank my colleagues here at the Global Policy Institute and Bay Atlantic University, and those of you who joined us online, and to be continued. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Cheers from Europe. Bye.
So nice to see you.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Paolo.
Hey, nice to see you. Hey, long time no see, actually.
Thank you. I teach at this university when I have time. Good to see you, everybody.
We miss you. Nice to see you.
Thank you, me too.
Adnan.
See you soon.
Bye-bye. Take care.